Good day. We are still in the chapter of parts of speech. In the earlier two lessons we discussed nouns and pronouns. In this particular lesson we're going to discuss about verbs. Now, what are verbs? Verbs are words that signify action or a state of being. So if I said I came late to dinner, the action word in this sentence is came, because it signifies the actual coming to dinner late. That's a verb. In the other instance, you can say the verb is a state of being, such as I am sick. So it's a state of being sick. Therefore, the word, which is am, signifies a state of being, and therefore we call this a verb. So this means that we have two types of verbs. We have action verbs, and we have verbs that state a state of being. In this case, we're going to start talking about action verbs. Now, what are action verbs? Action verbs are verbs that signify action. Action verbs are verbs that signify an action. Example, I ran for the student council. Okay, so the verb, which is ran, signifies an action, which is the actual metaphorically being a candidate for the student council. So that's an action verb. So any word that signifies an action is called an action verb. Now, in terms of action verbs, we have two also types of action verbs. They can be called either transitive verbs or intransitive verbs. So an action verb can be intransitive, or can be intransitive, or can be transitive verb. So if I said I put the box on that pile, the verb clearly is put, but the verb also has an object, which is in this case box. The object is the word that receives the action of the verb, and we call this an object. So call this here a direct object that receives the action of putting. Whenever a verb has an object in a sentence, we call this a transitive verb. Okay, so whenever a verb has an object, then we call this a transitive verb. However, if you look at this sentence, I walked 2 miles to the nearest market, the verb clearly is walked. That's the verb. But if you look at the sentence, walk does not have any object. So what received the action of walking, or who received the action of walking, is not in the sentence. Therefore, the verb has no object in the sentence. Therefore, we call this verb an intransitive verb. Intransitive verb referring to a verb that has no object. To find the object of the verb, always ask the question of who or what received the action of the verb. If there is no answer for that in the sentence, then the verb is intransitive and has no object. However, many times verbs don't come in one word, such as walk, paint, and so on. They also come in pairs. They come with a helping verb like I was walking, he is painting, she has swum, and many more. So if you look at these verbs, they actually consist of, number one, helping verb, and two, the main verb. And we call the whole thing a verb phrase. A verb phrase. So whenever you ask to locate the verb, make sure that it has both the helping verb and the main verb there. Another example is painting. This is the helping verb, and that's the main verb, and that's the whole verb phrase. Again, has is a helping verb, swum is the main verb, and has swum is the whole helping verb, the whole main verb, or what we call the verb phrase. But if we find this example in a sentence, I don't need money right now. If you look at this sentence, then the verb is need and do as well. Okay, so this is the helping verb, and that's the main verb. So the verb phrase in the sentence is do, need. What about the contraction of not, which is an apostrophe T, which stands for not? Not actually is not part of the verb. It functions as an adverb modifying do not. So not, or the contraction of not, is not part of the verb phrase. Now we talked about earlier about action verbs and that they can be transitive or intransitive. Now what about the state of being? For example, the musician is he. The verb of the sentence is, but it's not action actually, it's stating only a state of being, and it's only linking the musician with he, and he here is restating musician. So in this case the verb here is not an action verb, it's actually a linking verb that links between the subject and what we call the predicate nominative. Okay, that's the case of predicate nominative. So if a verb shows the act of being and only links the subject and the predicate nominative or predicate adjective, then it's called a linking verb and not an action verb. Another example where we have a predicate adjective instead of predicate nominative is the chef is skillful. Now in this case, again, is a linking verb. There's the subject, and skillful is actually describing chef. If it's doing that, then we call this a predicate adjective. Sorry, since it's an adjective, we call this predicate adjective. So only in the case where a linking verb or this verb links the subject and what's after the linking verb, and what's after the linking verb renames or describes the subject, then it's called a linking verb. But it's not always the case. Sometimes you might have a verb to be like is, are, was, were, or am, but they function as something else is not a linking verb. Example, she is there. Now, although it might look like a linking verb, which is in this case is, that's the verb, that's the subject. However, there does not actually rename or describe she. In this case, the verb is not a linking verb. Another example, she is on stage. She is on stage. Again, the same thing. You have is, that's the subject, but on stage does not rename or describe she. In this case, although is a verb to be, but does not function as a linking verb. In addition to the verbs to be that always function or mainly function as linking verbs like is, are, am, was, were, and has been, have been, had been, and all the rest will have been. So all the derivatives of the verb to be, which is here be, can be linking verbs. You can also add to them any auxiliary verb like might, have, been. Again, this all might have been can be a linking verb. Okay. So in addition to the verbs to be, we can also have additional linking verbs if they function as a state of being. So, for example, I can say, he appears sad, and grow, seem, feel, turn, become, look, smell, remain, feel, remain again, taste, and sound. So these are some additional linking verbs that can function as linking, but only if they state a state of being. So if I said he feels blue, blue here means sad, melancholic, then if I can replace it with the word is, then it's a linking verb. He feels his way through the darkness. Then in this case, feels here is an action verb stating an action that he feels his way through the darkness, and it's not a linking verb but an action verb. So if you can replace these words with any verb to be like was, were, am, are, or is, and does not change the meaning of the sentence, then these might be linking verbs in that particular sentence. Another example, if I said the scientist looked skeptical, then the verb looked, if I can replace it with the word linking verb was without changing the meaning of the sentence, then in this case looked is a linking verb. Scientist was skeptical. If I change the meaning here and change the sentence, such as the scientist looked at his experiment, then the verb looked here is an action verb, and if I replace it with the word was, the scientist was at his experiment, this doesn't make sense. So in this case, looked here is not a linking verb but an action verb.